Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We'll get started shortly. In the meantime, I'll go over a few housekeeping items and then I'll introduce our presenters for today. First, I'd like to provide a quick introduction of KPA. With over 30 years of expertise, KPA provides environmental, health and safety, and HR management solutions through our software, award-winning training, and expert consulting services. KPA helps clients identify, remedy, and prevent safety and compliance issues to prevent accidents and injuries, reduce lawsuits, fines, and penalties, improve productivity, and protect your reputation. Our solutions help organizations like yours lower risk for your employees, your business, and reduce costs. You can learn more over on our website at kpa.io. Now, just a couple of things to keep in mind for today's webinar. This session is being recorded, and we'll send you the recording and the slides after the webinar ends. Your microphones have been muted, so please submit any questions you have in the question feature, and we'll do our best to answer them. Any questions we don't get to today, we'll reach out to you after the webinar is over with a response. A reminder that everything we cover today is meant to be educational and is not a substitute for your legal counsel. Marcos is a senior risk management consultant with more than 8 years of EHS experience. His military background and education have provided him with some great understanding of compliance and safety issues for today's presentation. Mitchell is a compliance project coordinator here at KPA and resident expert on safety data sheets. He also helps with our regulatory audits and procedure management. With that, I'm going to turn it on over to Marcos and Mitchell to take us through today's webinar.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Marcos Vasquez, and today I'm going to be talking to you about just a few things on the agenda today. Federal SCS requirements, and then we're going to be talking a little bit about SCSs and what they're for and what they are. We have Mitchell Rimbaoa with us today, who's going to help us with actually diving into the weeds of the safety data sheets. How do you acquire these SCSs? What are they and how do you get to them? We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about ways to reduce your liability. Okay, so the Hazard Communication Standard, which is what SCSs are a part of, goes all the way back almost 3.5 decades to the early 80s, 1983. And that's when the Hazard Communication System was implemented for the manufacturing industry. Fast forwarding throughout the end of the 80s in 1989, it was implemented for all industries with hazardous chemicals. So in the 80s, for the majority of the 80s, it was just manufacturing, and then it was expanded to all of the industries, whether it be construction, general, or what have you. Okay, and then in 2003, the first globally harmonized system was published, and this is what a lot of the NATO countries are using, which closely mirrors what we're using today. All right, in 2009, there were changes that were proposed to the Hazard Communication System, which aligned more with the globally harmonized system. All right, and then in 2012, the Hazard Communication System now complies with EHS. Okay, so we all kind of, NATO countries, us, we all kind of got into the same program. And then in recent history, anyone who's been in management or has been in a facility that works with chemicals, in recent history, 2013, you may remember this. By December of that year, we had to train and make sure all our employees were trained on the new Hazard Communication System, which involved pictograms, the new labels, and the use of safety data sheets. So that may have been the first time that a lot of people have first heard the word SDS, or the acronym SDS. 2015, on the chemical manufacturing distribution site, anyone who manufactured or distributed or supplied these chemicals had to come in compliance with these standards. And that means that these chemicals now had to have pictograms on them, they had to have certain label requirements, and they also had to provide these safety data sheets. And then by 2016, June 1st, all employers had to be in full compliance with the globally harmonized system or the new Hazard Communication Standard. All right, so as you can see by the timeline, a lot of this stuff really didn't hit us out in the field until about 2013. And then as of 2016, we no longer say MSDS, for example. We say safety data sheet. All right, so what happens when OSHA is in your facility and they find that you're not compliant with this? Well, first of all, I have to tell you that it's been my experience that pretty consistently for the last, say, 8 or 9 years, this hazard communication standard happens to be in the top most frequently cited programs. I'm going to list some standards here and what they are. Okay, so 1910.1200 E subsection 1, failure to develop and implement a written hazard communication program that meets the requirements of the standard. Go to section H, subsection 1, failure to provide adequate employee training. That's a pretty big one. All right, so then 1910.1200 G subsection 8, failure to maintain copies of safety data sheets. And then the next one, which is failure to train employees on labels and SDSs. 1910.1200 G subsection 1, failure to have an SDS for each chemical in use at the facility. 1910.1200 E subsection 1, subsection I, failure to have a written inventory list of hazardous chemicals in use on the worksite. Okay, so overall, the hazard communication is the second most common citation as of right now. I can tell you that if you look back in the historical data on the OSHA website, you're going to see that the hazard communication system, or one of the components, has always been one of the top most frequently cited issues. Even if they are accessible, SDS access is a key component of your hazard communication program, and all chemical handling employees must know how to locate these safety data sheets. They also have to be familiar, and they're required to follow the safety precautions for each of the chemicals. If you look in section 8 of an SDS, it's going to tell you what type of personal protective equipment you need to wear when handling these chemicals. Let's walk through a real quick practical here. If you go up to an employee and they're using a chemical, you can ask them, hey, can you show me the safety data sheet for that? And then once you start reading the safety data sheet, once you find it, you go to section 8, and it says that the employee should have been wearing chemical safety gloves or eye protection or respiratory protection in some cases. You can also be cited for that as well. The reason being is that, in order to use this chemical, the requirement is that you also wear the personal protective equipment that goes along with that chemical. So you're not going to know that unless you are familiar with the safety data sheets. How does the SDS relate to the Hazard Communication System federal regulations? When the globally harmonized standard was incorporated into HCS, there were 4 major areas of change. So it is very similar to the Hazard Communication Standard of before, but the globally harmonized system that we have today has 4 areas that we changed. One is the labeling on the primary and the secondary containers. Number 2 is reclassification of hazardous materials. And number 3, requirements of hazard communication training. And then the last one, which is product safety documents to be formatted as safety data sheets. Let's talk about the change from MSDS to safety data sheets, or SDS, and the value it offers. Today, even after we went through the timeline, and as of 2016, MSDS has no longer existed. But today, many employers still recognize the familiar acronym MSDS. Usually when I'm teaching a hazard communication class, or the right to know, I usually like to start by asking people, does anyone know what an SDS is? So what is an SDS? And, at this point, several people have sat through the hazard communication training every year, and I get a few people that recognize it. But then I usually follow up and ask, does everyone know what an MSDS is? And usually everyone raises their hand, because MSDSs have been used, as we saw earlier in the presentation, they've been around since the 80s, and they went industry-wide in 1989, and they continue to have been an integral part of what we do in our facilities when we work with chemicals. And so everyone knows what an MSDS is. But it's important that you ensure your employees understand the difference, and that SDSs replace the MSDS. Okay, so a safety data sheet is what replaced it. It's a detailed information document prepared by the manufacturer or the importer or the distributor of the chemical, and it describes the physical and chemical properties of the product. And I like to think of it as a long form label. Obviously, not all of your chemicals, like a spray bottle, has enough room on the container itself to hold all of the information that you would need to properly use that chemical. Enters the safety data sheet, And then you have a separate document that tells you everything that you need to know about that chemical. Okay, so it's important that people understand what a safety data sheet is. It's important that you communicate that MSDSs, or material safety data sheets, are not around anymore, and they were replaced by safety data sheets.
So, the SDS, as Marcos was talking about, is very similar to what the MSDS used to be. But the issue with the MSDS is everything was hard to find. A massive fix that was implemented in order to make the SDS much easier to use was a simple 16-part format. So this format, it has the same parts in every single SDS, right? So if you have one chemical and then you have another chemical, you can find the same exact pieces of information that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and go through these different sections. The first section is the identification. So this section talks about who the manufacturer is, who is the distributor. So where did you get it from? If you ever have an issue with the SDS, you can always contact this manufacturer for more information on it. Second section is going to be the hazards identification. The third will be the composition. These three are important because it talks about what is dangerous about this hazard chemical. The fourth is going to be the first aid. The fifth section is firefighting measures. This kind of talks about, do you need A, B, C, D, or K fire extinguishers? Should you even use a fire extinguisher? The sixth section is going to be the accidental release. Section number 7 is handling and storage. The 8th section is exposure control and personal protection. The 9th section is going to be physical and chemical properties. Section number 10 is stability and reactivity. Section 11 is toxicology information. Section 12 is ecological information. Section 13, it's the disposal considerations. Section 14 is the transport information. Section 15 is a regulation information. And Section 16 is just going to be any information that does not fit in the previous 15 sections. So it's a pretty lengthy document, but it makes everything very easy to find because you know what should be in each and every single one of the SDSs. Marcos, I have a question for you.
Sure.
As we went over these sections, one of them is first aid. So, let's say that I'm in a manufacturing plant, and then I am using some acidic chemical, and then I accidentally drop it onto my eyeballs. Have you had any situations like that?
I have, and one of the stories that I can relate is back in the 90s, I was an aviation maintenance manager, and I had an employee who was washing one of the aircraft. And we used to use, back in those days, something called Henkel Turco, which is an aircraft cleaner. But this aircraft cleaner is so potent that if you leave it on the aircraft surface, not diluted, for more than 15 minutes, the paint would start to bubble because it would eat away at it, and all you had to do was wipe the paint off, and you would have bare metal. And that's how, to give you an idea how potent this chemical is. Back then, the GHS standard didn't exist, and so unfortunately, this employee was using a brush, and it fell down the brush and into his eyes. Needless to say, he was in a lot of pain immediately. Fortunately, some of the coworkers that were there brought him a water hose, and he was able to start rinsing his eyes. My investigation would later reveal that there was an eye wash station like 10 feet away. In the ensuing aftermath and chaos, finally one of the coworkers thought to come get help from the supervisors. And we called an ambulance, but more than 10 minutes had passed since the initial exposure. And the next 10 minutes, we all rushed over to the site of the injury. We assisted with getting him to the eye wash station. We helped with directing the ambulance over to our location. Once the victim had been transported to the emergency room, I went back to my office and began researching the MSDS for Turco. I located it, but it didn't seem to be much help. I remember it was about 18 or 20 pages long. It was kind of thick for an MSDS. And it had, in the very first section, it had all of these 5-syllable chemicals that I was not familiar with. And I later found out that some of those chemicals cause eye and skin irritations, and they're harmful if swallowed, also harmful if you inhale it, and it's also harmful if you absorb it through your skin. So in this situation, when you have a chemical, that primary route of entry could be through your eyes, through your skin, through your respiratory system, then you have a chemical that needs to be handled very specifically with the proper PPE and everything in place. So we learned a lot of lessons that day. I had everyone repeat their hazard communication training, but we also implemented practicals for training on MSDSs. And that's something that I encourage all facilities to do with their chemical handling employees. If we would have had the current GHS standard back then when this incident happened, I could have simply looked at the first page and maybe the pictograms would have told me everything I need to know. Like it's an irritant, it's a health hazard, it's a respiratory hazard. Also, I could have turned right to section 4 and looked at the first aid procedures, and I would have been able to tell exactly what I need to do. So speaking of pictograms, what are they? These are some of the most common ones that I see. And if you look at them, I like to think that a pictogram can cross the barriers of language and even education levels. All right, so starting with number 1, that's oxidizer. Oxidizers are chemicals that they can react and they can release oxygen. Oxygen saturated atmosphere can be dangerous because it's an accelerant, and all it takes is one spark to create a massive explosion or a fire. All right. Number 2 is a pretty common symbol. It's a corrosive symbol. You'll find these on your car batteries, for example. That's a pretty common one where you see that. Number 3 is a flammable or ignitable. So flammable substance, that means that it catches on fire very easily, and you want to handle it very carefully. You don't want to use it around areas where there's spark reducing devices or open flames and things of that nature. Definitely no smoking around this substance. Number 4 is acute toxicity. So toxin means it's a poison. That symbol hasn't changed since I was in grade school back in the 80s. That means poison. That means that when you come in contact with this, this could be you. You could end up as skull and crossbones. Okay. Number 5 is compressed gases. A compressed gas cylinder can be dangerous not just because of the gas that it holds, but because it's stored energy. That means that if you mishandle this this chemical container or this gas container, it could break, it could explode. If it's a cylinder, you could break the neck off or the valve, and you can have a torpedo flying around your facility, damaging a lot of equipment and unfortunately injuring people as it goes. All right, so you have to handle these compressed gas cylinders very carefully. Number 6 is a health hazard. Obviously, that means that it's harmful to you. Usually that one goes in conjunction with another pictogram that it's not shown here. It looks like a dead tree and a dead fish, and that's environmental toxicity. Number 7 is an irritant. It's an exclamation point. It just means it's an irritant. You usually find those on your commercial grade soaps or cleaners. And then number 8 is an explosive hazard, which just like the picture shows, there's a chance that this chemical or this container could explode, and it has to be handled very carefully. Okay. So Mitchell, can you tell us a little bit about the company responsibility or the facility's responsibility for upkeeping the safety data sheet library?
Absolutely. So the first thing they need to do is to do an annual chemical inventory, at least annual. This allows you to know what exactly you have in your hazardous chemical inventory. Once you know what's in there, then you can find your SDS. And then so that goes with maintaining your SDS library. When you get new products, don't forget to add the SDSs to those new products and add that to your inventory. You don't want to just do that one time and you get a lot of different things, you get 5 different chemicals, and then do it again, right? You want to make sure you keep up with it as much as you possibly can. This next one is very interesting. Keep SDS information for the entirety of any exposed employee's tenure plus 30 years after employee's active status is terminated. So let's put this into an example. Someone who is working at a company for 20, 25 years, every chemical, every hazardous chemical that they could have possibly came in contact with, you must keep the SDS on file, and you must keep that chemical listed in the inventory for the entire time that employees working there plus 30 years after. But this also goes to an intern. For example, if you have a summer intern that works at your company for maybe 2 months, every chemical that they have had the possibility to be exposed to or come in contact with, you must keep that chemical in your inventory and the SDS available for 30 years after that 2-month internship. The last one is ensure the SDS library is easily accessible to all employees exposed to hazardous chemicals. So easily accessible, there's a couple ways to think about that. The first one is pretty simple. Can I find the SDS? Is it on an easy to access software? Is it in a binder that's right next to the area that I'm working in? The next part that I think a lot of people don't really think about, the language of the SDS. For example, if your employee base, if they speak Cantonese, if 99% of them only speak Cantonese, you need to have SDS that is easily accessible to them, meaning it's also in Cantonese. So language also comes into play, and that just ensures that your company, your employees, and your everything is taken care of and is safe. So, Marcos, I'm biased, but SDSs seem really important. What are the most important things our audience needs to know today about how to abide by SDS regulations?
Well, Mitchell, that's a pretty good question. Quite kind of loaded. Um, During a NOSHA inspection, for example, you might be expected to produce the following: a written hazard communication program, uh, a list of your chemicals, a chemical inventory, which you recently went over, a proper labeling system, SDS documents, and employee access, as in you're going to show them how your employees access them, and then employee education and training specifications, so training records. Almost every OSHA event that I've been a part of, they request your training records so that you can show that you're complying with the aspects of the hazard communication system. So make sure that you have it all set and ready to go. Plus, you should obviously refer to it, train employees on it, and make it a part of your operation until it becomes second nature. The most important part of hazard communication is training. You can have all of these written programs and things in place, and you can have your chemical inventory in place, and you can have safety data sheets in place. But if your employees don't understand it or what it's for or how to get to it, none of that really matters. Throughout the year, you may want to do practicals and make sure that employees know how to get to their safety data sheets, and then even dive into them, make sure that they understand the chemicals that they're working with. The storage safety, the transportation safety, how to properly dispose of that chemical. Also, the safety data system or sheet coordinator, the SDS coordinator, whoever does the chemical inventories for your facility, should be in a position to oversee all of these chemicals as they come into the facility. Usually, in most of the places that I visit, someone who is in charge of ordering and receiving of new chemicals is in a good position to update the safety data sheets on the other side of that, so they know what's coming in the facility. If it's anything new that's being replaced, or then they can also add those safety data sheets to whichever system you're using. Okay, so it's important to make sure that it's not just someone who's not involved in the day-to-day overview of that company or your facility. And it needs to be somebody who is an integral part of it. Also, make sure you organize those chemicals by department. It's a good way to help employees know which SDSs are relevant.